on the bottom 5%. So if we were to take 5% of that 13,000 schools, that's 673 schools that you could turn around. 5% of the 4,000 or 5,000 in restructuring status, that could be 247 that you could turn around. Now you can begin to demonstrate some return on your investment. You go to Congress and say, look, here we go, we're making some progress. And so the Secretary wants to have that 5% turnaround, or 5% focusing on 5,000 schools over 5 years. So that is the focus. That is where he wants to see some return. And that is why School Improvement Grant, whether you're familiar with it or not, is an absolute anchor to what's happening with the Recovery Act. It's an anchor for the reauthorization. It's an anchor for the necessary argument in order to secure funds going forward before Congress. And it's all about, also in terms of reauthorization, it's all about giving the Department of Education the authority to live up to their mantra, which is they'd like to be tight about the ends and loose about the means. How can we reauthorize the ESCA in order to flip the incentives? So instead of focusing on the interventions, instead of focusing on how you are implementing the law, show us the results. Show us that we're demonstrating growth over time. If that can be done using growth models, using effective interventions, then you can be loose about the means, tight about the ends, loose about the means, but you need to be tight about the ends. And if you don't do that, and if everyone chooses the other, this is a picture, I think, this is what some have called the Wizard of Oz effect. So a friend of mine, Rick Hess at the AEI, American Enterprise Institute, is calling the urgency of this based on the Wizard of Oz effect. And that is, when Dorothy went to the wizard, she went there with expectations and fears of some kind of ultimate consequence. But when she got there, she pulled the curtain aside and she saw there was just this guy pulling the levers. Like suddenly, the mystique and the authority of the wizard just vanished. And who the hell cares about the wizard if it's just this guy? So the concern with the Department of Education is the Wizard of Oz effect. If everyone chooses other and everyone pulls the curtains and there's really no there are no ultimate meaningful consequences, then the reform authority of the ESCA is gone, the reform authority of the ARA is gone, and Congress thinks we just threw away a ton of money. And that, for the long-term education, funding levels for education is not a good sign. So there's this urgency to avoid the Wizard of Oz effect. Let's not have Dorothy pull aside the curtain. Let's actually have some meaningful consequences to this. So I do like to talk about the School Improvement Grant because it is this anchor. And in the big picture, in your discussions today and tomorrow, anytime you're thinking or examining particular programs, I think you should think about the big picture. As a fiscal matter, long-term education funding, I believe, is in jeopardy for all the reasons that we discussed. It just may not be a priority because, well, our lenders are asking us to make other issues a priority. And they are suddenly in charge. As an ARA matter, this is kind of the end game. This is part of the incremental development of every program in the Recovery Act. If you don't have this, if you don't have meaningful consequences, all the other 4 core education reform areas lose some of their significance. And as an ESCA reauthorization matter, whenever you provide them being the Department of Education, information on how you are effectively doing school turnaround, or how you plan to do it, or how you plan to develop your standards and assessments, or how you plan to meet any of the 4 core education reform areas, what's being done is providing the Department of Education a wealth of information and resources about proof points and best practices that are actually occurring at the state and local level. So now they can go before Congress and instead, unlike 2007, where George Miller unveiled his bill and everyone freaked out because it was so technical and there was no input and this was all done by Washington insiders, now we have the flip of that. The department can now say, we've gone across the nation and we have got the best ideas from states and localities. There is complete buy-in on this. And these 4 core reform areas need to address the key amendments to the ESA reauthorization, including the ultimate consequences, the school improvement. So when you provide this information to the department, you are providing them a rich database for ESA reauthorization. All of this is closely connected. And they need it because now they can demonstrate that these are your ideas, and that they can demonstrate that because school turnaround interventions are critical, this actually has a return on their investment. And so all of it relates. And as Dr. Stevenson noted, last Thursday the department kicked off their ESEA reauthorization campaign. They're going to go on their listening tour, and all of this will be closely connected to the work you're doing on the Recovery Act. So it's clear that all of these do connect. And when you work on any one of them, you work on the whole of them. And when you work on any part of ARA, you are working on ESEA reauthorization. And if you're working on any part of ARRA, particularly on consequences, you're providing justification to provide long-term funding for education from the congressional point of view. So what I hope to do today, and I'm sorry about the slides, was to give you kind of a big picture on where things stand on the Recovery Act, how it connects all together, how it connects to ESEA reauthorization, and how it connects to future funding from a congressional point of view. Obviously, there's a ton of work ahead, and so that's, with that, I'm going to close.